She had been running this family for 20 years. 4 sons, 1 compound, 0 opposition. She broke the first wife so quietly the woman didn't even notice until she had already forgotten her own name. The second one fought back, and Grace cried so hard, so convincingly that the whole family turned against the wife before she could finish her sentence. The third one, Grace didn't even need to fight her. She just befriended her, smiled at her, called her my daughter, and slowly, carefully turned her into a shadow. 3 daughters-in-law, 3 women who walked into that compound full of life and came out hollow. Grace had a system, and the system worked until me. My name is Rita, and the day I walked into that compound with my Cameroon Pepe, my catering business, and absolutely zero intention of shrinking myself for anybody, Grace looked at me and smiled. She had smiled at all of them. What she didn't know was that I had watched. I had seen what happened to Adazi. I had seen Sandra's law degree collecting dust on a bedroom wall. I had watched Blessing become a woman who laughed only when Grace laughed and frowned only when Grace frowned. I had seen all of it, and I had made a decision before I even unpacked my first bag. I was not going to be managed, not in the kitchen, not in the bedroom, not at the dinner table, not through tears, not through charm, not through whatever Grace kept visiting that woman at the edge of the market. On the last Friday of every month. I was not going to disappear, and that simple, quiet decision was the thing that brought Grace's entire 20-year empire crashing down. But let me start from the beginning. Before I go any further, if you have ever lived with a woman who thought she owned you, drop a hand emoji in the comments right now. And if you are new here, subscribe because you do not want to miss what happens in this compound. Trust me. Biggest house on the block, 7 rooms, 1 kitchen. A gate that groaned every time it opened like even the gate was tired of the drama inside. Grace had lived there for 20 years. She had raised 4 sons in that compound, buried her husband in that compound, and built a kingdom inside those walls that she controlled with the kind of precision that would make a military general nervous. She was not a loud woman. That was the thing people always got wrong about her. They expected a screaming, aggressive mother-in-law, the kind you could see coming. Grace was nothing like that. She was quiet, calculated. She smiled at you while she was dismantling you, and by the time you realized what was happening, you were already in pieces. She had rules. Nobody announced them. Nobody wrote them down. But everyone in that compound knew them. You cooked before 6 a.m. You greeted Grace before you greeted your own husband. You did not raise your voice inside her walls. You did not laugh too loudly. You did not ask where money went. You did not question the old wooden box under her bed. And you absolutely did not go looking for who she visited on the last Friday of every month. Nobody broke those rules twice. When her husband Emmanuel died, Grace grieved efficiently. 3 days of visible tears, the right amount of wailing at the right moment, the correct posture at the burial. Then she dried her face, walked into the parlor, and called her 4 sons to sit in front of her like school boys waiting for their report cards. Ima, Chidi, Toba, Kelechi. Grown men, married men, men with children of their own, sitting in front of their mother like they were 10 years old again. Grace looked at each of them for a long time. Then she said, "Your father is gone, which means I am all you have. And nothing in this house changes." Nothing. Nobody disagreed. Nobody ever disagreed with Grace. And somewhere on the other side of town, in a narrow house at the edge of the market that smelled of camphor, and something older and darker than camphor, a woman named Mama Chidima was already burning something in a clay pot. Grace had been her best customer for 15 years. People in the compound whispered about Mama Chidima. They whispered about the palm wine at every family gathering that Grace always poured herself, the cola nut ritual that Grace insisted on overseeing personally, even when Emmanuel was alive, even when it was the husband's role. The way Grace's sons always seemed to drift back to her, no matter how far they tried to go. The way their eyes went slightly foggy whenever they tried to make a decision she hadn't approved. People whispered, but nobody said anything out loud because in Grace's compound, the walls had ears and Grace had Mama Chidima. Adazi came into that compound in 2009 singing, literally singing. She had a voice like a church choir and a laugh that could fill an entire street. Ima, Grace's firstborn, was completely mad about her. The man could not stop smiling. The wedding was beautiful. Grace smiled through all of it the way a cat smiles at a mouse. 3 months later, Adazi had stopped singing. It started small, the way all Grace's work started small. Grace would taste Adazi's food, set the plate down quietly, say nothing, then go to the kitchen and make her own version. No confrontation, no insult, just a second pot on the stove. And somehow everyone always ended up eating from Grace's pot. Adazi got the message without a single word being spoken. Then it was the way Grace answered questions that Imad directed at his wife. Before Adazi could open her mouth, Grace was already talking every time, like Adazi wasn't in the room. Then it was the bedroom. Grace started knocking at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., midnight. "Ima, come help me move this box. Ima, the generator is making noise. Ima, I had a bad dream." And Ima, good, obedient, foggy, always went. By the end of that first year, Adazi sat in corners and watched the room like a woman who had just realized she was in a cage but couldn't find the bars. She stopped calling her mother. She stopped visiting her friends. She cooked, she cleaned, she smiled when Grace was watching. She became furniture. She had walked into that compound with a thriving event decoration business, a full diary, and a laugh that could fill a street. By year 2, the business was gone. The diary was empty. And the laugh was the first thing Grace took. Sandra arrived in 2013 with a law degree and an attitude that said she had read every relevant clause and was prepared to cite them. She wore blazers to Sunday dinner. She used words like boundaries and mutual respect. She looked Grace in the eye when she spoke. Grace looked at her on the first day and thought, this one will be interesting. She was right. Sandra fought for exactly 5 months. She confronted Grace about the midnight knocking calmly, professionally, the way a lawyer addresses a court. Grace listened to the whole thing. Then Grace cried. Not small, polite tears. Full performance, heaving shoulders, shaking hands. I have sacrificed everything for this family, and this is how I am treated in my own house. Chidi, Grace's second son, held his mother and looked at Sandra like she had just slapped an angel in front of the whole congregation. Sandra apologized twice. After that, Grace knew exactly which button to press. Whenever Sandra got confident, Grace got sick. Chest pain, dizziness. Once a full collapse in the parlor at the exact moment, Sandra had packed a bag to spend a weekend at her sister's. The ambulance came. Tests showed nothing. Grace recovered within 48 hours and asked for pepper soup. Sandra stopped packing bags. The law degree moved to the back of the wardrobe. Sandra stopped talking about returning to work after maternity leave. She started wearing house clothes every day. By 2016, she was asking Grace's permission before visiting her own mother. Just to keep the peace, she told herself, peace. As if what she had was peace and not surrender. Blessing should have known better. She had watched a Darcy shrink. She had watched Sandra fold. She had attended their weddings, seen the before and after, and said quietly to her friend on the phone, that woman is something else. Then she married Toba, Grace's third son, moved into the compound and discovered very quickly that knowing about a trap and avoiding it are 2 different skills. Grace did not fight Blessing. She befriended her. That was the new strategy and it was brilliant. Grace started calling Blessing my daughter. She braided her hair. She laughed at her jokes. She sent her soup when she was tired. Blessing glowed. She called her friend and said, Mama, Grace is not what people say. She just needed someone who understood her. The friend was very quiet on the phone. Then slowly, Grace began to use the friendship like a tool. You know, I would never tell anyone this, but between you and me. And then she would say something that sat inside Blessing's chest like a stone. About Toba's past, about family money, about what a real wife was supposed to do. Each conversation left Blessing more grateful for Grace's honesty and more afraid of everything else. Blessing stopped being Blessing. She became Grace's shadow, laughing when Grace laughed, frowning when Grace frowned, repeating opinions she had never formed herself. She thought she had a special relationship with her mother-in-law. What she had was a leash, a very comfortable, very well-decorated leash. 3 daughters-in-law, 3 women who had walked into that compound full of fire. 3 shells. 3 sons who had forgotten they were allowed to think for themselves. 1 compound, 1 woman, total control. Grace had built something extraordinary. And then came Rita. Kelechi met Rita at a cousin's wedding in Port Harcourt. He saw her across the room laughing loudly, running her catering team with a kind of calm authority that made everyone around her move faster without feeling rushed. And something happened in his chest that no preparation Mama Chidima had made could fully explain away. He proposed without asking his mother first. This was the first sign that something was very wrong. Grace heard about the engagement from Ima, who had heard it from Toba, who had heard it from Kelechi himself casually over the phone like it was normal for a son in this compound to make a life decision. Without consulting Grace, Grace sat with that information for a full day before she called Kelechi. She did not shout. She never shouted. She just said very quietly, I would have liked to know first, my son. Kelechi said, I know, Mama, I'm sorry. He was not sorry enough to unpropose. Grace met Rita 3 weeks before the wedding. She studied her the way a general studies a map before entering new territory. Rita was 29. She ran her own catering business with 6 employees. She had her own apartment. She paid her own rent. She had a laugh that reminded Grace uncomfortably of a Darcy, before Grace had gotten to a Darcy. Loud, unguarded, completely unbothered about whether it was allowed. Grace smiled at her and said, welcome, my daughter. We are going to get along so well. Rita smiled back and said, I hope so, Ma. And there was something in the way she said it. Not rude, not aggressive, just grounded, like a woman who already knew exactly where she was standing and had no plans to move. Grace noticed it immediately. She went to Mama Chidima that same week. The wedding was in December. Beautiful ceremony. Grace smiled through all of it, the same smile she had worn at 3 other weddings. The guests said she looked radiant. The photographer caught her laughing with Rita in one picture, arms around each other, both of them glowing. It was a very good photograph. By January, Rita was in the compound and Grace was ready. What Grace did not know, could not have known because nobody had ever made her learn it, was that Rita had also been watching for months. She had seen a Darcy's hollow eyes at family gatherings. She had noticed the way Sandra flinched slightly whenever Grace entered a room. She had watched Blessing mirror Grace's expressions, like a woman who had forgotten she had her own face. Rita had seen all of it and she had made a quiet, private, completely unannounced decision. She was not going to be managed. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't announce it. She didn't arrive in the compound with a speech or a confrontation or a list of demands. She just arrived with her Cameroon Pepe, her business phone, her loud laugh, and the kind of self-possession that 20 years of Grace's system had never had to deal with before. The compound had seen fighters. Grace had beaten fighters. The compound had seen lawyers. Grace had made lawyers cry. The compound had seen women who thought friendship would protect them. Grace had turned friendship into a weapon. But the compound had never seen a woman who simply, quietly, completely refused to become someone else. That was Rita. And Grace had absolutely no idea what to do with her. Comments below right now. Do you think Grace knew she had finally met her match? And share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Let's keep going. It started on the second day. Rita was at the stove cooking stew, completely in her own world, phone balanced between her ear and her shoulder, talking to one of her employees about a catering order, stirring her pot with the other hand. The kitchen smelled like Cameroon Pepe and fried onions and something deeply, unapologetically homemade. Grace walked in. She looked at the pot. She looked at Rita. She let the silence sit for exactly 2 seconds. The way she always did, because silence was one of her best tools. Then she said pleasantly, we don't use Cameroon Pepe in our stew here. Kelechi never liked it. Rita took the phone from her ear, finished her sentence to her employee, hung up. Then she turned from the pot, looked at Grace with a completely pleasant expression and said, "That's all right, Ma. This is for me and Kelechi. Kelechi likes Cameroon Pepe." She turned back to her pot. Grace stood there. 4 seconds, 5, 6. She had not been dismissed from a kitchen in 20 years. She opened her mouth, closed it and left. That night she went to Kelechi. She told him Rita was cooking separately, that it was dividing the household, that it hurt deeply, that she had not expected this from a new bride. Her voice was soft, her eyes were wet at the edges. Kelechi stood up to go talk to Rita. Rita was ready. She had made Kelechi's favorite food, the one his mother had never bothered to learn. And she sat him down at their small table and she said calmly, without drama, "Your mother is upset because I cooked with Cameroon Pepe. I am not going to stop cooking with Cameroon Pepe. I love you. I am happy here, but I am not going to let someone manage what I put in my own pot." Kelechi looked at the food. It was his favorite. It was perfect. He did not go talk to his mother. In the morning, something in his eyes was slightly clearer than it had been in years, just slightly, like a window that had been wiped once, not clean yet, but you could start to see through it. Grace noticed. She moved to round 2. Grace summoned Rita 3 days later. She was sitting on the edge of her bed when Rita arrived, shoulders slightly dropped, hands folded in her lap, the posture of a woman carrying a great and quiet sorrow. The room was dim. There was a Bible on the bedside table open, which was a nice touch. Grace said she felt unwelcome in her own home, that she was a widow, that she had given everything to this family, that she had not imagined spending her final years feeling like a stranger in the house she had built. She did not cry. She was too smart to cry immediately. She let the words do the work first. Rita sat across from her and listened fully, did not interrupt, did not shift in her seat, did not look at her phone. When Grace finished, the room was very quiet. Then Rita said, "Ma, I hear you. You have suffered, you have sacrificed. I respect that completely." Grace's shoulders relaxed slightly. This was the part where they apologized. Rita continued, "But I want to be honest with you because I think you deserve honesty. I am not a Darcy. I am not Sandra. I am not Blessing. I will not be managed. And I say that with love." Grace blinked. "I would like us to have a real relationship, but it has to be a real one, not a performance." The room was so quiet you could hear the ceiling fan. Grace had been running this family for 20 years. She had made lawyers cry. She had turned a singing woman into furniture. She had collapsed in a parlor and recovered in 48 hours. She had an answer for everything. She did not have an answer for this. Grace chose to escalate. In this compound there was a tradition. For the first 30 days after a new bride arrived, the mother-in-law sent food to the couple's room every evening. It was a gesture of welcome, a sign of warmth. Everyone said it was one of the things that made Grace such a good mother-in-law. Grace sent food to Rita's room that evening. It was beautifully presented. A covered tray, egusi soup, pounded yam, 2 pieces of meat. It smelled wonderful. Rita thanked the house help warmly, waited for her to leave, then carried the tray to the back of the compound. The compound dog ate very well that night. Rita had been doing this since she arrived. Not dramatically, not suspiciously. She simply did not eat food she hadn't watched being prepared. She had decided this before she moved in. She told nobody. The preparation Mama Chidima had put in that food had nowhere to land. Grace waited for results that never came. She waited for the fog to settle behind Rita's eyes. The same fog she had watched settle over a Darcy, Sandra, Blessing, and all 4 of her sons over the years. She waited for Rita to become slightly more agreeable, slightly more confused, slightly more dependent. Rita woke up every morning completely, irritatingly, magnificently herself. She ran her catering business from the compound. She laughed on the phone. She cooked with Cameroon Pepe. She greeted Grace respectfully every morning, and then went about her day like a woman who had somewhere to be and something to do and absolutely no interest in shrinking. Grace sent 3 more trays. The compound dog became the healthiest animal on Mango Street, and Grace, for the first time in 20 years, was running out of moves. It started with a Darcy. Rita was in the courtyard one afternoon on the phone with one of her employees, laughing, handling a catering dispute with the kind of calm authority that made the whole thing sound almost entertaining. She was fully herself, loud, present, completely unbothered. A Darcy was sitting nearby folding laundry. She had been folding laundry in that compound for 15 years. She watched Rita the way someone watches a fire in the dark, drawn to it, frightened by how much warmth she wanted to move toward. When Rita hung up, a Darcy said, almost to herself, barely above a whisper, "I used to have a business." Rita turned and looked at her, not with pity, not with shock, just attention, real attention. "What kind?" she asked. "Event decoration. Before I came here I was good at it." "Why did you stop?" A Darcy opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because the real answer, the honest, terrifying answer was, "I don't know, I just stopped. One day I was doing it and then I wasn't, and I can't remember the exact moment it disappeared." And that answer was so frightening that a Darcy closed her mouth, finished folding the laundry and went inside. She sat with that question for 3 days. On the 4th day she called her mother. Grace heard her laughing on the phone from 2 rooms away. The sound was so unfamiliar, so out of place in that compound, that Grace actually walked to the door to check it wasn't someone else. It was a Darcy, laughing on the phone with her mother like a person. Grace went back to her room and sat down. Then Sandra started talking to Rita. It happened over a shared task in the kitchen, something small, something domestic, and somehow they ended up talking for 2 hours. Sandra mentioned offhandedly that she had a law degree. Rita didn't laugh, she just waited. Sandra stopped smiling. She went home that evening and looked at the degree on the wall. She had walked past it every day without really seeing it. She looked at it now. She read her own name on it. She stood there for a long time. Then Blessing started watching Rita too. She noticed the way Rita spoke to Kelechi directly, warmly, without checking Grace's face first to see if it was allowed. She noticed the way Rita made decisions, small ones, daily ones, without asking anyone's permission. She noticed that Rita was not afraid. And Blessing realized, slowly and then all at once, that the friendship Grace had offered her was not friendship. It was architecture. Grace had built something inside Blessing's mind, a structure of fear and gratitude and dependency, and called it love. The realization sat in Blessing's chest like a stone being removed. It hurt, but it was the good kind of hurt, the kind that means something is healing. The suns were waking up too, slowly, quietly, in the way that men wake up when the fog they didn't know they were in starts to lift. Emma asked a Darcy one evening why she had stopped doing her event decoration. A Darcy looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them had an answer. But the question itself, the fact that he had asked it, that he had noticed, that he was looking at his wife and seeing her, was something new. Chidi started coming home earlier, not dramatically, just earlier. He sat with Sandra in the evenings instead of sitting with Grace. Grace noticed. She said nothing, but she noticed. Toba asked Blessing what she wanted for her birthday, not what Grace thought she should want. What she wanted. Blessing stared at him for so long he thought he had said something wrong. She hadn't been asked that question in years. She started crying, not sad crying, the other kind. Kelechi meanwhile was eating the best food of his life, and slowly remembering that he was a grown man who had proposed to a woman without asking his mother's permission, and the world had not ended. In fact, the world had gotten considerably better. Something was shifting in that compound, not loudly, not dramatically, not yet, but Grace could feel it. The way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. Something in the air was different. The compound that she had controlled so completely, so carefully for so long was breathing differently. She went to Mama Chidima. Mama Chidima burned something in the clay pot and told her to be patient. Grace went home and watched her daughters-in-law move through her compound. A Darcy laughing on the phone. Sandra looking at her degree. Blessing sitting quietly with something new and dangerous in her eyes. Rita cooking with Cameroon Pepe and running her business like she owned the world. She watched them, and for the first time in 20 years she was not sure her system was going to hold. It was Blessing who found Mama Chidima's house, not by looking, by accident. She had gone to the market alone, which was itself new, because for years she had only gone to the market with Grace or with Grace's list. But she had started keeping a small amount of money separately, quietly, in a place Grace didn't know about. Personal money for personal things. It was a small act of rebellion, barely noticeable, but it felt enormous. She went deep into the market that day, past the last stall, following a smell she couldn't name, something sharp and smoky and old. And at the end of a narrow path behind the pepper sellers, she found the house. She didn't go in, but she saw Grace coming out. Grace was tucking something into her wrapper, moving quickly, checking over her shoulder the way people check when they are somewhere they don't want to be seen. She didn't see Blessing. She walked away fast, head down. Blessing stood behind a stall and watched her go. She went home and said nothing. She said nothing for 1 week. She turned it over in her mind every day. What she had seen, what it meant, what it connected to. The palm wine at every gathering that Grace always poured herself. The cola nut ritual. The way the suns always drifted back. The fog behind their eyes that had been lifting slowly since Rita arrived. After 1 week, she told Rita. Rita listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When Blessing finished, Rita said, "How long has this been happening?" Blessing said she didn't know, but she remembered things now. Things she had filed away without understanding. The way her own thinking had felt cloudy in the early years. The way she had stopped wanting things she used to want. The way every decision had somehow always circled back to what Grace wanted. Rita said, "We need to tell the sons." Blessing said, "They won't believe us." Rita said, "They don't have to believe us, they just have to ask their mother." She paused. "It's the asking that will do it. Because Grace has never been asked directly. She has no practice in lying directly." Blessing looked at her. Rita said, "Call a family meeting." Sunday after church. It was a Sunday. The entire compound was home. Everyone was still in their church clothes when Rita walked into the sitting room and said calmly that they needed to talk about something important. Grace appeared at the doorway. She looked at the room. Her sons seated, their wives seated, everyone looking at Rita instead of her, and something moved behind her eyes fast, like a calculation. She said very calmly, "Who called this meeting?" "I did, Ma. Please sit down." The room held its breath. Grace did not sit immediately. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, reading the room, calculating. Blessing spoke first. She told them what she had seen. The house at the edge of the market. Grace coming out. The timing, the last Friday of every month. She spoke quietly, steadily, without drama. Grace did not confess. She never confessed, not formally, not in the way people confess in films. What she did was smaller and more devastating. She deflected. She said they were all being ungrateful. She said she had sacrificed her life for this family. She said Rita had been poisoning her sons against her since the day she arrived. Then she looked at Rita and said very slowly, very deliberately, "This is not your family yet, my dear." Rita looked back at her and said, "It became my family the day I married your son. And with respect, Ma, I am the only person in this room who has not been controlled by you, which means I am also the only person in this room who you cannot gaslight." The word gaslight landed in that sitting room like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples went out. Adazi made a sound, small, barely audible, like something old and compressed finally cracking open. Adazi stood up, walked to the window, stood there with her back to the room for 30 seconds, then turned around. Her face was different, clearer, like a woman who had just remembered something important about herself. Blessing put her face in her hands, not crying, thinking hard and fast. Sandra looked at her husband, then at Grace, then back at her husband. Something in her lawyer's mind was clicking pieces into place. And finally, Grace looked around the room. 4 sons with clear eyes. 3 daughters-in-law with straight spines and lifted chins, and 1 daughter-in-law who had never slouched in the first place. She said, "After everything I've done for you people." Nobody answered her. That was the moment Grace understood she had lost. Ima and Adazi were the first to leave. 3 weeks after the family meeting, they found a flat 15 minutes away. Ima told his mother on a Tuesday evening. Grace said she would not be coming to their housewarming. Ima said okay, and carried the first box to the car. Adazi relaunched her event decoration business 2 months later. She used a corner of their bedroom as an office while she saved. By the time they moved out 4 months after the confrontation, she had 3 clients and a waiting list. On her way out of the compound, she stopped at Grace's door and said she forgave her. Grace said she had nothing to be forgiven for. Adazi said, "I know," and kept walking. She didn't look back, not because she was angry, but because she had spent 15 years looking at that compound and she was done. She had a business to run, a mother to call, and a laugh to reclaim. She had wasted enough time. The gate groaned behind her. She didn't even flinch. Chidi and Sandra left quietly. They packed on a Thursday when Grace had a church meeting. Deliberate, clean, no drama, no confrontation, no final argument. Sandra had learned from watching Grace that the most powerful moves are the quiet ones. She packed her clothes, her children's things, and her law degree off the wall, wrapped it carefully in a cloth, tucked it under her arm like something precious she was finally taking back. They left a note on the kitchen table. It said, "We love you, we cannot stay." 6 words. After years of silence, 6 words were enough. Sandra had already sent 3 job applications from her phone before they reached the new apartment. By the end of that month, she had 2 interviews. By the end of the following month, she was back in a blazer. Not the house clothes, the blazer. Chidi watched her get dressed for her first day back at work and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "You look like yourself." Sandra looked in the mirror. She did. Toba and Blessing left the same week. Blessing did not leave a note. She had spent years being Grace's shadow, echoing her words, borrowing her opinions, laughing when Grace laughed and frowning when Grace frowned. She had given Grace enough of her words. She had nothing left to say. She just packed her things, held Toba's hand and walked out. The gate groaned behind her. She exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. In the car, Toba reached over and held her hand. He said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." Blessing looked at him. She thought about all the years, the braiding sessions that were actually interrogations, the soup that came with strings attached, the friendship that was actually a cage. She said, "Just don't let it take you that long again." Toba nodded. They drove away, and then there was Kelechi. Kelechi was the last. He stayed an extra 3 months, partly out of guilt, partly because he was the youngest, and breaking free from the youngest position takes longer than people think. There is something about being the baby, the most loved, the most held, the most shaped, that makes leaving feel like betrayal, even when staying is the thing that is actually destroying you. Rita did not rush him. She packed their personal items slowly, one box at a time. She kept her business running. She cooked with Cameroon Pepe. She waited. When Kelechi finally told his mother they were leaving, Grace did something nobody expected. She cried real tears. Not performance tears, not the heaving shoulders and shaking hands she had deployed so effectively against Sandra. Real ones. Quiet ones. The kind that don't come with an audience in mind. The kind that come when a person finally fully understands what they have actually lost. Not what they are about to lose, but what they already lost long ago through their own hands. Kelechi held his mother's hands and said, "Mama, we will visit. We are not abandoning you, but we cannot live like this." Grace said, "Like what?" "I only wanted to keep my family together." Kelechi said, "You wanted to keep us. That is not the same as keeping us together." Silence. He kissed her forehead. It was a gentle kiss. The kind a son gives a mother he still loves, even after everything, even after the fog, even after Mama Chidima, even after 20 years of a system designed to make him small. He picked up 2 bags. Rita picked up the rest, efficiently, without ceremony, the way a woman picks up things that were always hers. They walked out. The gate groaned one final time and then the compound was quiet. Grace sat in the sitting room for a long time after they left. The chairs were still slightly warm. The curtain moved gently in the doorway where Kelechi had just walked out. The compound, 7 rooms, 1 kitchen, 1 groaning gate, was completely, absolutely, perfectly silent. She had built this place with Emmanuel's money and her own iron will. She had filled it with her children and controlled it with everything she had. Charm, tears, sacrifice, Mama Chidima's preparations. 20 years of careful, patient, brilliant management. She had never lost control of a single room in this compound. She had lost all 7 in one afternoon. The house help brought her tea at 6 p.m. Grace drank it alone. She sat at the head of the dining table. The chair that had always meant she was in charge. The chair that had always meant something. And she ate dinner with nobody to serve it to, nobody to correct, nobody to hold. She had broken 3 daughters-in-law so thoroughly that they had forgotten themselves. The 4th one had arrived and remembered herself so loudly that the other 3 had started remembering too. And the sons, her sons, the 4 boys she had raised and shaped and held so tightly for so long, had looked at their wives instead of their mother. In the end, that was the thing that had undone everything. Not a fight, not a confrontation, not even Rita's words. Just 4 men choosing quietly to look in a different direction. Grace ate breakfast alone the next morning, and lunch alone. And dinner. The compound stood, the walls were solid. The rooms were full of furniture and photographs, and the small evidence of 20 years of life. Everything was exactly where she had put it. Everything was exactly as she had arranged it. She had all the power, she had none of the people. And the silence, the complete, absolute, perfectly constructed silence that she had spent 20 years engineering noise against, sat in every room of that compound like a verdict. She did not go back to Mama Chidima after that, not because she had changed, but because there was nobody left to give the preparation to. The compound was hers. Completely, finally, entirely hers. It was the loneliest place on earth. Here's what I want you to take from this story. Grace was not stupid. She was not even entirely wrong to want her family close, but she confused control with love. She confused obedience with loyalty. She confused a full compound with a full life, and by the time she understood the difference, the compound was empty. Rita did not fight Grace. She did not campaign against her. She did not give speeches or organize rebellions or drag anyone to her side. She simply refused to disappear. She stayed fully, loudly, unapologetically herself, and that existence alone was enough to remind 3 other women that they had a self worth returning to. You cannot control people into loving you. You cannot manage someone into staying. And you cannot build a family on fear and call it home. The most powerful thing Rita ever did was nothing dramatic. It was just this. She walked into that compound and she stayed herself completely, every single day. And that was enough to change everything. If this story moved you, like this video right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it.